Welcome to This Climate Business, the podcast about turning the climate crisis into an opportunity. I'm Vincent Heringer. Every week, I talk to entrepreneurs, investors and experts about what they're doing to solve the climate crisis and get New Zealand down to zero emissions by 2050 or sooner. This Climate Business is brought to you by Podcasts New Zealand. New Zealand grows great oats and makes excellent oat milk in Sweden. That's right, New Zealand oats are shipped to Sweden where they are processed and returned to our shores to be bottled and sold as New Zealand made. That hardly seems the sustainable alternative we all hoped for. The madness of that scenario is finally being redressed by a new player, the Boring Oat Milk Company. And I'm joined by Boring founder and former cracker entrepreneur and one-time barista Morgan Moore. Morgan, thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Vincent. Great to be here.
Cool. Where are you actually joining me from? I feel like, every time I interview someone, I find out a little bit about their lives, about how COVID is forcing them into cupboards and bathrooms and lounges and things. Tell me, where did you launch the Boring Oat Milk Company under lockdown 4?
Yeah, well, it was the latter. Was in my lounge. I am in a rental in Grey Lynn, and so level 4 started 2 days before we launched Boring. And I sort of have a quote that I say now is that COVID is what happens when you make plans, and that certainly was the case for us. But launching then has meant all of our fancy launch plans have completely just gone to the wayside. But we have had a lot of people on their devices, on their phones, looking at social media. So we've had a lot of attention. So I guess with the downsides, there's been upside. As with business, you just got to roll with it.
How many weeks have you been in the market now?
So how long have we been in lockdown? Is it nearly 5 weeks?
5 weeks, yeah.
Yeah. So just under 5 weeks. The response has been extraordinary.
And the response has been extraordinary from who? Tell me about what's been happening since launch.
I guess to take it back a while, when I first looked into doing an oat milk 3 years ago, nobody really knew what an oat milk was, apart from in the UK and America. And so it was still relatively unknown. So when I'd go and speak to retailers then and potential investors and things like that, people were like, oh yeah, but it sounds pretty niche. Whereas now a lot of people really are aware of it. There's been a lot of press about companies from overseas doing it and just how great it is for the environment and how it's sort of rising and overtaking soy as the second best-selling plant milk. So I think everybody's known about it. People have been learning more about oat milk, and the questions are coming up time and time again, oats grow well in New Zealand. We know what oat milk is, but why isn't anyone making it here? And people keep asking that question. And so when we launched, a lot of people have just been saying, great, you're here. We've been waiting for this. And trade, definitely, retailers have told us that they've stopped accepting any new oat milks because there's so many of them. But they'll accept us because we're a New Zealand made one. Being New Zealand made has just opened up so many doors, and cafes here, a lot of cafe owners, baristas are pretty woke and aware of their impact and sustainability. And so a lot of the cafe owners are just saying, just really stoked that we've got a oat milk that's made here, and not just from the sustainability perspective, but also supply, because with COVID, there's been huge shipping issues. If you look on the supermarket shelves, a lot of the plant milks are out of stock, but that's not an issue for us. Yeah.
There are New Zealand brands. I'm thinking Otis and All Good. There must be others as well. Is there room for so many brands? And tell us about the scale of the opportunity, because it is growing. I think if I saw a figure of it growing 190% at the moment, occupying good chunks of the supermarket shelf now. But what is the natural limit, do you think, of the oat milk market?
Well, we've still got a way to go in New Zealand, because you've got almond milk is well and truly number one. And then it's 60% of all plant milk sales around the world is almond. So almond's still, well and truly the leader, but soy is a close second, and then oats third. But you're right, it is growing in comparison to other players and brands in those other plant milks. Oats still really under indexed. So there's plenty of scope, and especially with this growth. And if we're, which I think we will, to follow suit of other countries, and oat becomes second fiddle to, and hopefully first, to almond, then there's still opportunity there. But as with everything, there's always, you get a time when something like this is popular and you get a lot of new players coming in, and then you sort of have a few drop off. So it will be really interesting to see, like fast forward in 3 years' time, it'll be interesting to see who of the dairy players have come in, because I think that will definitely be a thing, and who of us smaller guys are left standing.
Why is Southland so good at growing oats? What is the conditions, the environmental conditions for growing down there that makes it so successful?
Yeah, well, it's perfect for growing oats. It requires like little to no irrigation because of the rainfall. And so the big part is the rainfall, and the next is the long daylight hours. So oats are typically, majority of them are planted in spring and harvested in autumn. So you have these long daylight hours, which gives a great amount of time for that photosynthesis period and the grain, what they call the grain fill, which is the oat plant to actually grow. So by having those long daylight hours, the good amount of rainfall, it just makes for the perfect conditions. You need like little to no irrigation whatsoever to grow oats on there. And then also as well, they are very nitrogen hungry. And so a big issue with New Zealand is around our intensive farming. You know, a lot of our soils are really heavy in those nitrates. So putting the oats in there helps soak that up and just create a more balanced soil structure.
We're going to come back to some of the sustainability aspects later, but I'm curious also about why it's been so hard to process oats in New Zealand.
Oh, yeah, I know. It shouldn't be this hard. I mean, yeah, like we're a farming nation, so we grow this crop really well. We also have a lot of manufacturing capability in New Zealand and a lot of UHT lines. You know, we produce heaps of UHT milk and dairy milk and send it overseas. But the issue is all of these UHT lines are only set up to process liquids. So I went and spoke to nearly all of them, and they all said to me the same thing. They said, Morgan, yeah, we'll look at processing your oat milk, but you have to deliver it to us in liquid form, like in a milk tanker, and then we can do the processing. And so that was the issue, and that is the issue, is getting the oats converted to a liquid. I had so many conversations that went absolutely nowhere. And then I met these apple juice manufacturers in the Hawke's Bay. So I thought, you know, they've got the same issue. They've got the same challenge. They've got this crop that they have to then get into liquid form and then send it to get processed. And so I went and spoke to the guys that were handling their apples and, you know, asked them what sort of kit they had and what was the process, and figured out that it was quite similar to what we needed for oat milk. But that was still 2 years ago that I started those conversations. So even though they had a lot of the right equipment, we still needed to order more. And with COVID, you know, supply chains and compliance as well, like I underestimated how long it would take. So that first part of the process, getting the oats into, like, you know, milling them down and getting them into a liquid form, that's the bit that nobody's been able to solve.
But you have now. And so those Apple processors, are they now able to market that capability to other oat brands and other crop brands to develop different types of milk and opportunities?
Yeah, definitely. They said they were really interested and they'd been looking at doing this anyway, and they'd tried to do it. They had done they'd had a disastrous trial of trying to make oat base. We call this oat base, and it didn't work. So they were like, you know, you can try it, but you've got to pay for all the trials. And we've tried it and didn't really work. So kind of good luck to you. You can use our kit, but it probably won't work. So, I mean, I was lucky to have a really good beverage technologist who's also a processing engineer, who we worked together. Her combined with her expertise and like 30 years experience and my intensive Googling skills, we figured out a way of how it should be processed. But during that, you know, yeah, we taught them a lot. We worked together, but teaching them a lot about how to actually process this milk, and also around the enzymation step. That's a really big part of any oat milk's IP, is the enzymes that you use and how long you use them for. And so there's thousands of types of enzymes that you can use. And we trialed hundreds, and we've found a combination that gives us the like sweetness profile that we really like, and same with the viscosity. So yes, these processors will be able to kind of use, like, to sell oat base to others, but they wouldn't be able to use like our same enzymation combination. So that's sort of our IP. So they'll have to work with other companies, and other companies will want to do that as well. They'll want a slight, depending on the use case for them, like if they're making an oat yogurt, they'll want a slightly different profile, and the same with, oat stout or something like that. So yeah, they've now got the capability that they can sell this oat base as an ingredient, which is pretty cool.
That's very cool. There's been talk for 6 months or so about building a big processing plant in Southland. I think that possibly up to, I read, up to 25 million litres a year. Has that progressed? And if it does, would you make use of that facility?
Yes, it has progressed. I've heard that they're sort of at the investment stage. These things take time. Even once they close off that investment round, it will probably take about 24 months for them to order the kit, get it commissioned, and get it up and running. So it's still quite a way off. But, it's only going to be great things for the sort of New Zealand oat brand because, as it stands, there's not a lot of capability there. No, well, we've actually partnered up with our manufacturer. So our processor, the Apple Press in the Hawke's Bay, we've got our manufacturing up there. So no, we won't be looking down south.
Right. Okay. So you get this oat base, and then you use enzymes to then further refine it or to process it into what? Yeah,
so the enzymes break down the starches and release the sugars. That gives it the good sweetness profile, nice texture. Then you separate it because what you've got is a sort of slurry of oats and water, but it's got a lot of particles in there. So you need to get those out. And so you separate the solid from the liquid. And then the solid, what we do with it currently is we sell that off for animal feed, but we're doing some work at the moment looking to convert that into a plant protein and plant protein for human consumption as well. So another value add product out of this whole value chain. And then what we have is the oat base. It's like a concentrated sort of sweet liquid that goes into a milk tanker, goes down the road to the Apple Press, then the manufacturers, and then what they do is they put it into these big batching tanks and add our other ingredients. So we use sunflower oil, which gives it good mouthfeel, helps it foam with coffee, so it helps it give a good froth, to like get you that nice nerdy term, but micro foam. And then other ingredients are added. So, you got your sea salt, your vitamin B, vitamin B2, B12, and calcium. Then it goes through like UHT lines, so heat treated and homogenizer, and then gets bottled. And so our bottles are actually blown on the line as well. And so it just means that they're really sterile, and it gives it a 12-month shelf life. Yes, that's the process you have to make oat milk.
Are you able to say what volumes you are expecting in the first year?
Yeah, we're looking at 1 million litres for New Zealand, predominantly New Zealand and a little bit of Aussie, but that's not even taking into account, I mean, if we get into the big supermarkets at Aussie, but especially not taking into account China. So that is the next market that we're seriously looking into. But as you can imagine, we're just being very careful and considered about it. And it's quite an exciting market because they're predominantly plant milk drinkers anyway. And then you have the sort of, the rising middle class and the children of those rising middle class who are drinking more coffee. So there's more of a coffee culture. And even though you'd think, how could boring oat milk, the word boring, how could that work in a culture like China, where it is like the complete antithesis of what they typically like? But what we're finding is that, a lot of the sort of children of the rising middle class are wanting things that are different. They're not wanting to buy what their mum and dad are buying, and sort of wanting to rebel. So yeah, there's some interesting work that's going on there, but 1 million litres for the first year, just predominantly for New Zealand, and who knows after that?
Who knows? Fantastic. I read that New Zealand farmers produce about 33,000 tonnes of oats a year. That could grow, right? If you could find a market for that. Give me a sense of how much 33,000 tonnes, what does that produce in volume terms?
Oh gosh, good question. I need to work that out.
Let me rephrase the question: is that a lot? And could you where does most of that go? Does it go into cereals or
Yeah,
animal
no,
feed?
most, to be honest, only just over 50% of it, of that 33,000 ton, goes into human food. So like cereal and porridge and the like. And about 45% is for animal feed. So there, and 33,000 ton, like it's not a lot. We've got plenty more scope there. And to be honest, we need to be exporting and selling a lot for it to have a good impact on the land as well. Because, say for our million litres, we'll be using about 160 tonne of oats. So that's not heaps. So we need to, really build up the New Zealand oat brand story and sell that to the world and start exporting a lot, for us to have that good impact on land. But there's been incredible response from, the farming community and people, especially dairy farmers, who are already using oats to help soak up those nitrates. And so, for them, if they could use that and sell that for human consumption and get more money for it than what they're currently getting for feed, then that's all the better for them.
Fantastic. And the product that we're seeing now, you've got two products, haven't you, under the Boring brand? One is for baristas and one is for kind of general home use. Tell us about that.
Yeah, it's as boring as that. It's one. So we've got the barista version, which we have developed with coffee professionals. We had a lot of help from the guys at Coffee Supreme who just stress tested it on their machines and with their baristas and sent it out to cafes and just making sure that it works really well with their coffee in all different forms. So not just on the machine, but, pouring it into filter coffee or having with a cold brew. So we tested it a lot because I was like, for me, the taste and performance was just the most important thing, because there's plenty of crappy plant milks out there and we don't need to add to that. So we have the barista variant, which, to be honest, will be our biggest seller, because as well, a lot of people with COVID are making more coffees at home. And so we've got, like a lot of people are buying this barista grade. And the original one, it has less oil in it. It's more for your like smoothies and your cup of tea and cereal and the like.
Well, thanks for that. I'm curious to know about the interest that's you're getting from oat growers. Is the oat industry, the growing industry, are they interested in what you're doing? And do they get excited about the opportunities at the consumer end that you've been focused on?
Yes, definitely. I think a lot of farmers at the moment are very, very aware of, their emissions and their soil health. And they're doing, for the most part, majority of them are doing whatever they can to try and create a more sustainable farm for themselves. And the thing with oats is that it's, like I said previously, they are really good for the land. But one thing that now that we've launched that we really need to look into is looking at like how this is sustainable. And I'm not just talking about sustainability in terms of environment, but also financially and culturally too. And it's about, not just looking at oats, because there's no such thing as an oat farmer. Oats are a part, they're a good rotational crop. And so it's looking at this holistically and looking at what other crops do we need to be growing in rotation along with the oats and with animals to create a diverse and healthy ecosystem that is gentle on the land and has low emissions. So we're working with a group of leading crop scientists and technologists and like farm innovators from Canterbury who are working to convert 100,000 hectares of intensive land to diversified farmland. But yeah, it has to be a viable and exciting alternative for farmers, because that's why a lot of farmers have gotten into dairy, because it is a lot more profitable than what other farming is. With the climate crisis, like we need to be looking into this and looking into alternatives. And it's about looking at the whole ecosystem, and that isn't just what it's doing on the land, but there's also how it's helping the farmer in their back pocket too.
In what way are oats good for the soil and good for the land? In what way are they better, say, than agriculture?
Oats require very little water. And so if you're comparing it to, to be honest, if you're comparing it to, say, dairy milk, it's, to produce a litre of dairy milk, 1 litre of dairy milk requires 13 times more water than oats, 11 times more land, about 7 times more fertilizer, and it takes about 3.5 times more greenhouse gas emissions than oats. So oats are, they're really nitrogen hungry. They help soak up those nitrates that leach into waterways as well. And they've actually been shown to improve the yield of subsequent crops after them as well. So when we're looking at this, we're not just looking at it in isolation and just looking at that oat crop itself. It's how, again, does this work? Is a bigger rotational period, and what is the net value to the farmer and also for the soil and for the land as well.
Do you anticipate displacing any dairy? Do you think there will be conversions away from dairy to oats?
Oh, to be honest, there has to be. I don't think necessarily that oats are, that a dairy farmer is going to convert their whole land to arable farming, but it's about sort of doing it in bite-sized chunks as well. It's pretty sobering stuff reading like the recent IPCC report on the state of the climate, and it's like undeniable that human impact has created the climate crisis. And just as we dug ourselves into this hole, we've got to get ourselves out as well. And 22% of New Zealand's total emissions are from dairy cattle. And so we need to wean ourselves off dairy. And although oat isn't a silver bullet, it's one viable alternative. So I see, if we can get more dairy land converted to a more diverse farming landscape, then that's great. But yeah, it's not necessarily going to be them just switching solely to oats, obviously. It's like, how do we help these farmers and present to them an option that is sustainable both environmentally and economically?
I assume that oats need flat land. I can't imagine harvesting oats on hillsides.
Yeah, no, you're right. They do. And it's especially it is for that harvesting process. So the combine harvester needs to get across a good plain of land. We're looking, where oats grow best is Southland and Otago and parts of Canterbury as well. It's where the good daylight hours are and the good rainfall, around Sheffield and Canterbury. But yeah, it's not well suited to everywhere. So it's not like we're sort of saying, that we're sort of, waving the magic wand and just saying like, everybody grow oats and it's going to be great. It's very specific to, it's very specific to your farm and the setup that you have as well. And because, I'm from Taranaki, and there, on my auntie's farm, she grows a lot of oats. But to be honest, they get so much rain there that they have to harvest quite early. And so it means that the yield, the oat quality isn't as good and the yield isn't as great. So for her, it just wouldn't be a viable solution. So yeah, it is about looking at those, identifying those parts of New Zealand that can grow oats. And there are some parts in the North Island, like around the Napier-Taupo Highway sort of area. They've trialing growing some oats there, and it's seemingly looking good. So yeah, plenty of scope.
You would think Northland as well would be well suited to it, given just how sunny it is. Or is it not so much the sun as just daylight hours?
Yeah, just daylight hours. Yeah.
All right. Okay. Has anyone done any research on what the sequestration potential is of arable crops?
Yes, and that is something that we're looking into at the moment. So yeah, again, it's, the whole conversation around sort of sheep and beef farming and like carbon, buying carbon credits and planting more for that. So really understanding what is the carbon that it can actually capture and lock in. So yeah, we're doing some work on it at the moment. The data that we've gotten is mainly from the Northern Hemisphere. So we're trying to make it, specific for here because the information that I've gotten is that it will be slightly different for New Zealand. So yeah, that's something that we're working on.
Yeah. How does one become an expert in oats? I know you've got a background as an entrepreneur because you've launched a cracker brand and also you've worked as a barista. So there's your coffee knowledge. But how did you get into this? What made you think that a gal from Taranaki could launch a global brand?
Yeah, I mean, it is a funny thing of like, how do you end up where you do? And I've touted myself as a sort of unofficial oat ambassador of New Zealand, but
someone had to be.
Yeah, right. It's I mean, and the funny thing is until recently, oats that they're not a sexy grain. It's not quinoa. It's like so it's not exactly been the coolest thing to get into. But I mean, yeah, again, I'm from Taranaki, like farming background, and I have just got a very keen interest in, like a lot of New Zealanders, in New Zealand, in our environment. And I mean, I did a business degree, and I always wanted to have my own business one day, but I knew it was going to be around something to do with the environment and having a product that was sustainable as well. And so I actually was living in Scotland on my OE about 10 years ago. And I just saw how many products they had using oats. And I knew that oats were good for you. And I did some more research and it was just like, wow, they're really good for the land as well. And why is it that in New Zealand, we only really, eat them for porridge and for cereal? Like why aren't we using them with more products? And so in Scotland, they had oat cakes and they had like oat whiskey and, oat in the haggis and all this stuff. I was like, this is great. They've got multi-use for oats. So I came back to New Zealand and I started to make oat cakes and sell them at the local markets. And it grew, like, got picked up by the supermarkets and started exporting and got bigger and bigger. And started off just me like hand rolling out the oat cakes in the Ponsonby Community Centre kitchen during the day, and then my husband would help package at night. And but yeah, it got bigger and bigger, and we're in sort of 80% of supermarkets in New Zealand. But I sort of took a step back and went and spoke to some farmers again about growing oats and understanding more about them and their needs. And one farmer said to me, he said, Morgan, like, we'd love to grow more oats, but your fancy crackers just aren't going to cut the mustard. Like, we're not going to do good volume from that. And I was like, you know what, you're right, we're not. So I had to go back to the drawing board and think of what product are people consuming every day. And this was 3 years ago. And that's when I, stumbled across some brands that were doing really well with oat milk overseas. And so I thought, let's do that. But yeah, it is funny how you end up where you end up, but it's all come from a place of, it just so happens that it's oats, to be honest, it could have been anything that would help the environment and that we can add value to. Because again, our classic problem in New Zealand is we're sell commodities and it's volume, not value. And so how do we have a product that is like a great world-class brand and actually bring value to this crop or this primary industry that otherwise is being commoditized?
Exactly. The journey to get there, that's 3 years and probably more of being effectively, underwater. How does one finance such a thing? Were you able to bring in investors, or have you funded it all yourself? That it's a big task that you've set yourself.
Yeah. Oh, Vincent, I've had such a wild ride with investors because, in New Zealand, like, we just don't have a great appetite for startups, and especially not in FMCG. Like, tech's a bit different because there is a greater scope, but even then it's quite limited with the funding that you can get. But investment for startups, people typically go to sort of crowdfunding or something like that. But I think because our process was there was so much sort of secrecy around it and so much IP. When you go into crowdfunding, you have to share a lot. And so I had to be really careful with all of this, that, we had to kind of, when we're developing this process, that we, I sort of had to retain as much IP as we could. And so I started out, I spoke to some private equity guys and had them invest, and they invested and did what do you call it? Like convertible loan. But that was a disaster. That didn't end up well. And so then I had to go back out and find more investment. I ended up partnering with another company, and then they realized that New Zealand manufacturing was actually quite more expensive than what they envisaged, and they wanted to get it made overseas. So I was like, no way, that's a non-negotiable for me. So we parted ways with them. And so then third time lucky, I went out, and this was literally just May this year. So we're four months out from launch. And again, we're just bootstrapping it. Like every time, every step along the way, every little investment round, like we weren't getting huge amounts. It was just sort of enough for this kind of feasibility study, I guess. But yeah, it came to May this year. But here I had this product that was, fully validated supply chain and process, and the formulation was fantastic. The branding was great. And we had, customers lined up, like retailers. So it was a pretty firm proposition by this point. So I went out for investment again. And again, raising capital, it is full on. It is a big process. But thankfully, I sort of just had a conversation with my manufacturers, the Apple Press, and I said to them, look, I'm raising capital again, just letting you know. Don't worry, I will pay my bills. I'm good for it, I promise. And then they sort of just tapped me on the shoulder, and they're just like, what about us? And so, so we officially signed with them maybe about 3 months ago.
That's fantastic. I mean, it does highlight really a need, doesn't it? That, as you say, the tech ecosystem is quite well funded now with angels and with a venture capital network. The food venture side of the business is really unexplored, it feels to me. There's obviously a huge amount of money in the mainstream, the dairies and the beef and lambs and so on. But what you're describing is hard graft, hard scrabble to get a food brand up and running.
Yeah, and it's, a lot of my friends who've got different brands, they're in a similar boat as well. So they're having to look offshore, to the States for VC funding and stuff like that, which is a real shame. It would be great to keep this money in New Zealand and keep ownership in New Zealand. But I think New Zealand investors are just a bit more conservative. And like for us, now that we've launched and everything's sort of been validated, now we're getting like people calling and sending emails, but that was not the case a few months ago or a year ago. So yeah, it is really difficult out there. And a lot, like I pretty much spent 3 years consistently capital raising. And so, which may have taken up about 40% of my time really. But yeah, so there is a huge gaping hole out there. Yeah, so it's a big opportunity for somebody to get into it.
What does the near future look like? The long term, who knows? Do you have a kind of a series of products that you're going to be launching, or is it all guns blazing for the two main brands that you've got going, or two main products you've got going?
Yeah, new product development is something that I'm really interested in. And an obvious one is having flavoured milks and having smaller size, like ready to drink. So we will definitely be doing those. But also then even more exciting is sort of looking into products that are, more sort of like fortified elixir type drink. So, a big criticism around plant milks is that it doesn't have enough protein. So we're looking at ways that we can get the protein that we lose out of the process when we put it through the decanter and separate the solid from the liquid. When we lose that and we have that solid there, that from the oat base, it's got a lot of protein in it. So we're looking at how do we get that, convert that into their oat protein that we can then put that back into the product and sell that to markets like China, where it is, they're looking for really heavily fortified drinks. It's almost like a nutritional supplement. New Zealand and Australia, we're different. We're not. It's interesting, even though sort of a lot of dairy do-or-diers have already criticised us about having low protein. We've found that New Zealand and Australian consumers aren't actually looking for protein in their milk. Like we already consume far too much protein as it is per person. And so that's not really a significant protein source and what they're looking at for it. So yeah, so a lot of new products in the pipeline, predominantly milks.
So it's thinking about the core product and then thinking about what extensions and adaptations you could do with that oat base. Well, there's just so many more things to learn, and I really appreciate the time you've given us. I know you're a busy person running this future global enterprise out of your lounge. Well done, Morgan. We look forward to hearing more from you very soon.
Great. Thank you so much, Vincent.
Thanks for listening to This Climate Business. I hope you enjoyed the program. There are more episodes as well as notes and blogs on our website, thisclimatebusiness.com. I'm Vincent Heringer, and if you know someone who deserves to be interviewed on our show, email me, vincent@thisclimatebusiness.com, or find me on Twitter, vheringer. That's 2 E's, 1 R. Meanwhile, I'll be back same time next week. E noho rā.